The day started like any other for her. She woke up early, just as the sun began to rise, and stood by the window of her small but beautiful apartment sipping her morning coffee. The city below was already busy, people rushing to work, horns echoing in the streets, but she stood quietly, lost in thought. Today was supposed to be a big day for her. After years of building her business from scratch, she was finally traveling overseas to sign a partnership deal that could change everything. It was the kind of meeting that could open doors she had only dreamed of before. She had saved and sacrificed so much to get here, and this flight felt like a reward for all the sleepless nights she had endured. She looked at her suitcase near the door. Everything was perfectly packed: documents, a neat outfit for the meeting, and a small photo of her parents tucked safely in her wallet. They had always told her to never forget where she came from, no matter how high she climbed. She smiled, remembering their words, and whispered softly, "This one's for you." At the airport, she arrived earlier than most passengers. She had always believed in being punctual, maybe because she hated the feeling of being rushed. The terminal buzzed with energy, filled with travelers in business suits, families going on vacations, and tired faces waiting in lines. She walked to the check-in counter, confident but calm, and handed her passport and ticket to the airline staff. The attendant scanned the ticket and looked up with a polite smile. "First class? Congratulations," she said, printing the boarding pass and handing it back. It wasn't her first time on a plane, but it was her first time flying first class. She had spent months debating whether to buy that seat or not. It was expensive, almost too expensive, but she told herself she deserved it. After all, she had worked years to reach this point. It wasn't about showing off. It was about allowing herself a little moment of comfort after everything she had been through. As she made her way through security and toward the boarding gate, she noticed how differently people looked at her. Some smiled politely. Others looked surprised, as if trying to figure out why someone like her was walking toward the first-class area. She brushed off the feeling, pretending not to notice. She reminded herself that she had earned her place there, fair and square. When boarding was announced, she stepped forward, holding her boarding pass tightly. The attendant scanned it and smiled again. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." For a second, her nerves faded. Maybe everything would be fine. She walked down the jet bridge, feeling proud and excited. The first-class cabin looked like something from a dream. The seats were wide, soft, and spaced far apart. There was champagne on a tray, small gift bags on each seat, and soft music playing in the background. She found her seat and gently placed her handbag beside her. As she sat down, she couldn't help but smile. It felt good to be there. For once, life seemed to be rewarding her for all her hard work. A flight attendant approached her and asked for her drink preference. She politely requested a glass of water. The attendant gave her a quick nod, but then paused, glancing at her ticket again. The woman's tone shifted slightly. "Excuse me, ma'am, could I see your boarding pass again?" She handed it over, confused but still calm. The attendant looked at it carefully, then at her, and said, "I think there might be a mistake. Are you sure this is your seat?" Her smile faded. "Yes, it's mine," she said quietly. "I booked it myself." The attendant looked uncertain and walked away with the ticket. A few passengers nearby began whispering, their curious eyes darting toward her. Within moments, another flight attendant arrived, an older man with a forced smile. He spoke softly, but with that tone people use when they've already made up their minds. "Ma'am, it seems there might have been a booking issue. Could you please follow me to the back of the cabin? We'll sort this out." She felt her chest tighten. "There's no mistake," she said firmly.
"This is my seat." He sighed and lowered his voice as if trying to avoid attention.
"We just need to confirm something. Please come with me." Reluctantly, she stood up. As she did, she could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. Some people looked confused, others judgmental. A few almost smug, as if confirming what they had silently assumed, that she didn't belong there. She walked behind the attendant toward the galley, where another staff member was waiting. They whispered to each other before turning to her again. "Ma'am, we're sorry," one of them said. "There was a system error. Your ticket was downgraded to economy. You'll have to move." She froze, trying to make sense of the words. "Downgraded? That's impossible. I paid for this seat weeks ago. I even have the confirmation email." "I understand," the attendant said quickly, his tone still polite but dismissive. "We can sort out a refund after landing. But for now, please move to economy so we can prepare for takeoff." Her heart sank. She could hear the whispers again from nearby passengers. A woman in the next seat smirked, pretending not to look directly at her. "Some people just try their luck," the woman muttered under her breath. The words cut deep. She wanted to argue, to show them proof, but she could see that nothing she said would change their minds. The flight attendant stood there waiting, impatient but pretending to smile. She gathered her things slowly, her hands trembling. As she walked down the aisle, the whispers grew louder. A few people looked away, embarrassed for her, but no one said anything. She passed through the curtain separating first class from the rest of the plane, and the difference was immediate. The seats were tighter, the air felt warmer, and the sense of space and respect was gone. She found her new seat near the back, squeezed between two strangers, and sat down quietly. For a long moment, she just stared out the window, trying to hold back tears. She wasn't angry about losing the seat itself. It was about the way they made her feel. Like she didn't belong, like no matter what she achieved, she would always have to prove herself again and again. The flight attendants came by later, pretending nothing had happened. They handed her a cup of water and moved on quickly. She looked down at her reflection in the plastic cup, her eyes tired and sad. She had faced many challenges before, but this one hit differently. It wasn't about business, money, or competition. It was about dignity. As the plane took off, she leaned back in her seat, trying to steady her breathing. The city below shrank into tiny dots of light. She closed her eyes and thought about her younger self, the girl who once dreamed of traveling the world, believing that hard work and kindness were enough to earn respect. She had believed in fairness, in merit, in the idea that effort would be rewarded. But at that moment, sitting in that narrow seat, she realized that sometimes the world still needed to be reminded what fairness truly meant. During the flight, she couldn't focus on anything else. Even when the meals were served, she barely touched them. Her mind kept replaying what had happened: the humiliation, the judgmental looks, the quiet smirk from the woman in first class, the dismissive tone of the staff. Every detail stayed with her. But beneath the sadness, something else began to stir. A spark, a quiet growing fire deep inside. She thought about all the people who had ever been treated unfairly. People who worked hard, only to be told they didn't belong. She realized that she wasn't alone, and maybe that was the problem. Too many people accepted these things silently just to avoid trouble. By the time the plane landed, that fire had turned into determination. She stood up calmly, thanked the crew politely, and walked out of the plane without another word. Outside the terminal, she took a deep breath. The humiliation still hurt, but she refused to let it define her. She looked up at the sky, watching another plane take off in the distance, and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll come back here, but not as a passenger." She didn't know how or when, but she meant every word. That small moment of injustice had awakened something powerful inside her. She was no longer just a businesswoman chasing success. She was now someone on a mission to change the way people were treated, not just in the skies, but everywhere. And though no one knew it yet, that flight, the one that had tried to put her down, was the beginning of something extraordinary. When she returned home, she felt the exhaustion of the long flight, but the weight in her chest wasn't from travel, it was from the memory of what had happened. She sat at her kitchen table, the city lights glowing faintly through the window, and stared at the wall in silence. She had told herself that one day she would make a mark in the world, but tonight, she felt small, not because she had failed, but because the world had tried to make her feel that she didn't belong. The next morning, she opened her laptop and read the airline's formal response to her complaint. It was polite, but it was also hollow. They apologized for the inconvenience, explained the system error, and promised to investigate so it would not happen again. No acknowledgement of the humiliation. No accountability. Just words carefully chosen to avoid admitting fault. She closed the laptop slowly, her fingers lingering on the keys. A sense of injustice simmered inside her. She thought about all the times she had faced challenges in her life. Growing up, she had never had much. Her family had struggled, and she had worked odd jobs just to support her dreams. People had underestimated her countless times, dismissed her abilities, or assumed she didn't belong. But she had learned early that her worth wasn't defined by what others thought. She had to define it herself. And now, sitting in the quiet of her apartment, she realized this was no longer just a personal challenge. It was a bigger problem, one that affected many others who had been treated unfairly. Her first instinct was to talk to someone she trusted. She called her oldest friend, someone who had seen her through her hardest days. As she recounted the incident, the anger in her voice grew. She described how the flight attendants had doubted her, how the other passengers had stared and whispered, and how powerless she had felt. Her friend listened quietly, then said, "You know, this isn't just about a seat. It's about how people are treated every day because of who they are. Maybe this is your chance to do something bigger." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she began researching the airline industry. She wanted to understand how decisions were made, how promotions worked, how tickets were allocated. What she found surprised her. The industry was filled with rules and traditions, but it was also full of unspoken biases. Leadership positions were mostly held by men, and women, especially women from minority backgrounds, were rarely seen in decision-making roles. She realized that the problem wasn't just one flight or one airline. It was systemic. Over the next few weeks, she became obsessed with the idea of making change. She started talking to pilots, flight attendants, and even airport staff. Many of them were open about the challenges they faced. Some shared stories of passengers being treated unfairly because of how they looked or where they came from. Others described how hard it was for women and people from minority groups to climb the ranks. She listened carefully, taking notes, absorbing every detail. Every story added fuel to the fire growing inside her. She also turned inward, thinking about her own strengths. She had built a successful business before, one that had grown from a tiny startup to a respected company in her industry. She knew how to manage teams, raise funds, and create a vision that inspired others. If she could apply those skills to aviation, maybe she could build something truly different, something that treated people fairly and respected their dignity. One evening, she shared her idea with a mentor she had long admired, someone who had achieved great things but had always remained grounded. She explained her plan, to start her own airline, one that prioritized equality, fairness, and respect for all passengers. Her mentor was silent for a moment, then smiled. "It's bold," they said. "Almost no one would dare. But you, I believe you can do it. Just remember, bold ideas need persistence and patience. You'll face resistance, but that's part of the journey." Encouraged, she began making concrete plans. She created a list of everything she would need: investors, legal advisors, pilots, aircraft, operational staff, and a strong brand message. She knew it would not be easy. Many people would laugh at the idea. Banks might refuse to lend her money. Competitors might dismiss her as naive. But she was no stranger to rejection, and every no she had ever received in her life had only made her more determined. She reached out to a small network of trusted colleagues and friends, people who shared her vision of fairness and equality. Together, they brainstormed strategies, studied market trends, and analyzed what successful airlines were doing right and what they were doing wrong. They found a common theme. Many airlines prioritized profit over people. Service was uneven, and discrimination often went unchecked. She knew that if she could build an airline focused on respect, inclusion, and customer care, she could not only succeed financially, but also make a real difference in the world. As she worked on the plan, she also focused on her own mindset. She spent hours thinking about what kind of leader she wanted to be. She didn't want to be someone who ruled with authority alone. She wanted to be someone who inspired her employees to believe in the mission, who created a culture where everyone felt valued, and who made passengers feel seen and respected. She wrote notes about leadership principles, fairness, and empowerment, sometimes waking in the middle of the night to jot down ideas that came to her in dreams. Funding was the first challenge. She started small, putting aside part of her savings and selling a portion of her existing business. Every dollar was carefully allocated. She met with investors, explaining her vision and the potential of an airline built on inclusion. Many laughed. Some shook their heads. "You can't compete with the big airlines," one person said. "The industry is too tough, too regulated, too expensive." But she didn't let their doubts stop her. She knew that every great success had started as a risky idea, and she was ready to take that risk. Months turned into a year of preparation. She traveled to meetings, negotiated contracts, and hired a team that believed in her vision. She met pilots who shared stories of unfair treatment, flight attendants who wanted better training and respect, and engineers eager to join an airline that put people first. Slowly, the pieces came together. It was exhausting, but every challenge reminded her why she was doing this. Every setback strengthened her resolve. Meanwhile, she continued to deal with the memory of the humiliation she had suffered. Some nights it returned vividly, the whispers, the smirks, the way she had felt so small and powerless. But she didn't let it break her. Instead, she turned those memories into motivation. She would not let this injustice remain unchecked. She would build something bigger than herself, something that would make the world take notice. One evening, after a long day of meetings, she sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool and the lights shimmered like tiny stars. She thought about the passengers who had doubted her that day on the plane. She thought about the crew who had treated her unfairly. But instead of anger, she felt clarity. This was her chance to create a new standard, to make sure no one else would have to feel the way she had felt. She whispered to herself, "I will not let this end here. I will change this world even if it takes everything I have." Her friends and family noticed a change in her. She was no longer just ambitious. She was relentless. She spent hours studying aviation regulations, learning about airport operations and understanding airline management. She talked to experts, read every report she could find, and slowly her knowledge grew. She was no longer just dreaming. She was preparing step by step for something that most people would call impossible. By the time she felt ready to launch her airline, she had a clear vision. It would be small at first, focusing on domestic routes, but it would set a standard for how airlines could treat passengers. It would hire a diverse team, provide fair pay, and ensure customer dignity was never compromised. Her airline would not just carry people from one place to another, it would carry a message. That fairness and respect could exist even in the most competitive industries. Even as she celebrated these plans privately, she knew that skepticism would follow her every step. People would say it was a foolish dream. They would try to discourage her, but she had learned something crucial from that humiliating flight. The world often doubts those who challenge the status quo. And that doubt, she realized, could be turned into fuel. Every moment of disbelief, every smirk she had seen on that plane, became a reason to push harder, to work longer, and to prove that change was possible. In the quiet of her apartment, late at night, she wrote down her mission statement. She wrote about fairness, dignity, empowerment, and courage. She wrote about creating an airline where no one would feel invisible, where no one would be judged before being seen. She wrote about turning personal injustice into a force for collective good. And as she read those words aloud to herself, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, burning bright, mixed with determination that would not fade. The path ahead was uncertain. There were still countless challenges: funding, logistics, regulations, and skeptics. But she had taken the first critical step. She had transformed anger into purpose. And with every meeting she attended, every contract she signed, and every small victory along the way, she reminded herself of the day that had started it all, the day she was denied a seat she had earned. That moment had planted a seed, and now that seed was growing into something extraordinary. Her story was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel unworthy. Every time she thought about her airline, she imagined smiling passengers, proud employees, and a sky where fairness was not a luxury, but a given. And deep down, she knew that this was just the beginning. The journey would be long, the obstacles daunting, but nothing could stop her now. She was ready to turn a personal moment of injustice into a movement that could change the way people flew forever. She woke up that morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The apartment felt brighter somehow, as if the sunlight itself was cheering her on. Today, she would take the next step in making her dream a reality. She had spent months preparing, researching the airline industry, talking to experts, learning about regulations, and connecting with people who shared her vision. Now it was time to start turning ideas into action. Her first goal was to find a small plane to begin operations. She didn't want to start big. Starting small would allow her to focus on quality and service, the things that mattered most. She reached out to several leasing companies, explaining her plans, her vision, and her dedication to fairness and equality in every aspect of the airline. Many people laughed at her, saying she was too ambitious, that the risks were too high, or that she didn't have the experience to succeed in such a competitive field. But she refused to be discouraged. One by one, she met with potential partners. She met pilots who had flown for years, but had grown frustrated with the rigid corporate culture of other airlines. They were drawn to her vision, to the idea of working for an airline where respect and dignity were not just words but rules. She also met flight attendants who had experienced discrimination or poor treatment, and they too were inspired by her mission. Slowly, she began building a team of people who believed in more than just profit. They believed in change. Even with the team assembled, she faced the biggest challenge: funding. Banks and investors were wary. Many asked the same question, phrased politely but with skepticism. Why would anyone start a new airline now? The competition is enormous. How will you survive? She listened to them carefully, and when she spoke, she didn't argue. She simply told them her story. She told them about the day she had been denied a seat she had earned, about the humiliation, and about her vision for an airline where no one would feel invisible or undervalued. Some investors shook their heads, but a few leaned in, captivated by her passion and sincerity. After months of presentations, negotiations, and careful planning, she secured enough funding to lease her first plane. It was smaller than what major airlines used, but perfect for her needs. She named it Unity One, a symbol of the values she wanted to carry into every flight. She and her team inspected the aircraft thoroughly, making sure it was safe, comfortable, and equipped to provide the best possible experience for passengers. Next came the challenge of designing the cabin. She wanted every detail to reflect her philosophy. Seats were comfortable with extra legroom, and each came with thoughtful touches like charging ports and adjustable lighting. She insisted on a layout that encouraged inclusivity rather than hierarchy, where every passenger felt respected regardless of the seat they purchased. Flight attendants were trained not just in safety procedures but in empathy, customer care, and recognizing the importance of dignity in every interaction. She also worked tirelessly on branding. She wanted the airline to stand out not just for its services but for its values. Every advertisement, logo, and slogan emphasized inclusion, fairness, and empowerment. She made sure to highlight stories of her team members, their experiences, and their commitment to creating a better travel experience. The airline wasn't just a business, it was a statement, a promise to passengers that they would be treated with respect every time they stepped on board. As the launch date approached, anxiety mixed with excitement. She spent late nights reviewing flight plans, safety protocols, and staffing schedules. She personally met with every employee to ensure they understood the mission. She wanted them to feel part of something bigger than themselves, something that could truly change the culture of aviation. Some employees were nervous. Starting a new airline was risky after all. But she reminded them that their courage and belief in fairness could make all the difference. Finally, the day arrived. The first flight was ready to take off. She walked through the cabin one last time, checking every detail, greeting each passenger and ensuring that everyone felt welcomed. She looked around and remembered her own experience years ago, sitting in that economy seat while others whispered and stared. She silently promised herself that no one on this flight would ever feel that way. As the plane lifted into the sky, she watched the city shrink below, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. This was more than just a business milestone. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The passengers smiled, flight attendants moved confidently, and the aircraft glided smoothly. For the first time in her life, she felt that her vision was becoming real, that the sacrifices, sleepless nights, and relentless determination were finally paying off. But she knew this was just the start. Building an airline was never easy, and obstacles came quickly. One day, a technical issue forced a last-minute delay. Another day, a competitor tried to discredit her airline, suggesting that a small company couldn't provide safe, reliable service. Some investors began to doubt whether the business would succeed. Each challenge could have broken someone less determined. She faced every setback calmly, analyzing the problem, finding solutions, and pushing forward without losing sight of her mission. She also noticed something unexpected. People were beginning to talk about her airline. Word spread quickly about how passengers were treated with respect, how the staff was attentive, and how the company prioritized fairness above all. Social media posts went viral. Passengers shared stories of exceptional service, and travel blogs praised the airline's unique approach. Slowly, the world began to take notice. Her airline was no longer just a dream. It was a movement gaining momentum. Despite early success, she remained deeply involved in every detail. She personally spoke with employees about challenges they faced on the ground, listened to passenger feedback, and constantly sought ways to improve. She knew that leadership wasn't about delegation alone. It was about connection, empathy, and accountability. Every decision she made was guided by her core values, and she refused to compromise on them, even when pressure from competitors and investors tempted her to cut corners. Her team grew closer with each passing day. Pilots, engineers, and flight attendants began sharing ideas, inspired by the inclusive culture she had built. Meetings were filled with collaboration, brainstorming, and problem-solving rather than hierarchy and fear. She encouraged creativity, welcomed new perspectives, and celebrated small victories. Slowly, she realized that her airline was not only changing the travel experience for passengers, but also transforming the lives of those who worked there. Months turned into years. Her airline slowly expanded, adding new routes and increasing its fleet, but never losing sight of the original mission. She continued to meet with passengers personally, listening to their stories and ensuring that their voices shaped the airline's policies. She visited airports, spoke with staff, and built partnerships that aligned with her values. Each step forward felt like a victory, not just for the business, but for the idea that fairness and respect could thrive in a competitive industry. She also became a mentor to others who wanted to challenge unfair systems. Young entrepreneurs and professionals came to her for advice, inspired by how she had transformed personal humiliation into a business that championed dignity and equality. She shared her experiences openly, encouraging others to stand firm in the face of injustice and to never let rejection or ridicule define their worth. But even as she celebrated these milestones, she never forgot the day that had started it all. The humiliation, the whispers, the feeling of being invisible, it remained etched in her memory. That memory became her guide, reminding her why she had started this journey and why she had to remain committed to her values. Every success, every satisfied passenger, and every inspired employee was a victory not only for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. Then one day, she received a piece of news that made her pause. The airline that had humiliated her years ago, the one that had denied her first-class seat, was struggling financially. Rumors of bankruptcy and poor management were spreading. She thought about it quietly, reflecting on how life sometimes had a strange sense of irony. She didn't rush to gloat or celebrate. Instead, she considered the possibilities, thinking carefully about how she could turn this situation into an opportunity, not for revenge, but for impact. She began to study the struggling airline, analyzing its finances, operations, and culture. She realized that acquiring it could be a way to expand her vision, to set a new standard in the industry, and to correct the injustices she had once experienced firsthand. But it would be risky. It would require immense resources, careful planning, and a steady hand to manage the transition. Yet she felt ready. After years of building her airline from scratch, she had the knowledge, experience, and determination to take on this challenge. As she prepared for the next chapter, she felt a deep sense of clarity. Every obstacle she had faced, every setback, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. She wasn't just an entrepreneur anymore. She was a leader, a pioneer, someone who could challenge an entire industry and prove that values and success could coexist. She knew the road ahead would be demanding, but she also knew that she had the courage and resilience to face it. Looking back on the journey so far, she realized that the humiliating flight had been a turning point, a catalyst that changed the direction of her life. Without that moment, she might have continued her work quietly, achieving personal success but never challenging the bigger systems of injustice. Instead, she had turned pain into purpose, transforming a single negative experience into a movement that would touch countless lives. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every passenger who had ever been treated unfairly, every employee who had felt undervalued, and every person who believed that the world could be better. As she prepared for the next steps, expanding her airline, acquiring new opportunities, and continuing to champion fairness, she felt an unwavering sense of purpose. She was ready for the next challenge, whatever it might be, knowing that the fire that had begun on that humiliating flight still burned brightly within her. She had been running her airline successfully for a few years now, expanding carefully, hiring the right people, and building a reputation for fairness and excellence. Every step she took was deliberate, grounded in the values she had set from the very beginning. But even with the steady progress, she couldn't stop thinking about the airline that had once humiliated her. It was struggling now, And while some people might have seen it as a mere business opportunity, she saw something more. It was a chance to rewrite a story, to change an entire system from within. She spent weeks analyzing the airline, going through its financial reports, operations, and customer feedback. It was clear that it had been mismanaged for years. Employees were dissatisfied, passengers complained frequently, and leadership was disconnected from the reality on the ground. Yet she also noticed potential. The airline had a large fleet, established routes, and a recognizable name. If she could acquire it, she could combine it with her existing company and set a new standard in the industry. The process was not easy. She met with the board of directors, bankers, and legal advisors, navigating a web of bureaucracy and skepticism. Some board members were dismissive, unable to see the value in selling to someone like her. After all, she was still young in the aviation world, and they doubted whether she could manage such a complex operation. She listened to their doubts calmly, never letting frustration show. She knew that patience and persistence were her greatest assets in this moment. During meetings, she didn't rely on anger or past humiliation to make her point. She spoke clearly about her vision, her experience running her airline, and how merging the two companies could create a stronger, more inclusive organization. She highlighted the opportunity to rebuild the failing airline's culture, improve customer satisfaction, and create a model that others in the industry could follow. Slowly, some of the board members began to listen, intrigued by her confidence and clarity. The negotiations took months. She faced countless challenges, from legal hurdles to financial negotiations. Investors questioned her strategy, competitors tried to intimidate her, and even some of her own team expressed concern about taking on such a large risk. But she remained focused, reminding herself of why she was doing this. She wasn't motivated by revenge or pride. She wanted to create fairness in a place where injustice had once thrived. She wanted to show that leadership could be rooted in respect, empathy, and integrity. Finally, after months of careful planning and negotiation, the deal was finalized. She had successfully acquired the airline. As she signed the final documents, she felt a strange mix of satisfaction, excitement, and reflection. The airline that had once made her feel powerless was now in her hands. But she didn't dwell on the past. She knew that the real work was just beginning. The news spread quickly. Headlines announced the acquisition, highlighting the irony of the situation. A woman had purchased the very airline that had denied her a first-class seat. People were captivated by the story, inspired by the courage it took to turn personal humiliation into a bold business move. Interviews, articles, and social media posts celebrated her determination, but she remained grounded, focusing on the tasks at hand. Her first priority was to meet with the employees. She wanted to understand their perspective, learn about the challenges they faced, and show that leadership could be compassionate and inclusive. She visited every department, speaking directly with pilots, flight attendants, engineers, and administrative staff. Many were skeptical at first, used to a culture of fear and rigid hierarchy. But her sincerity, her willingness to listen, and her clear vision for change quickly began to win them over. She implemented immediate changes. Policies that had been ignored or abused were enforced fairly. Employees received training in respectful workplace behavior, and a new system for reporting concerns was established, ensuring that voices at every level were heard. She also introduced programs to support career growth, particularly for women and underrepresented groups, creating a pathway to leadership positions. Her approach was deliberate, balancing firmness with empathy, demonstrating that accountability and kindness could coexist. At the same time, she focused on the passengers. She wanted every traveler to feel respected, valued, and safe. She redesigned the cabin layout to improve comfort and accessibility. Flight attendants were trained to provide attentive service without bias, and feedback mechanisms were introduced to ensure that passengers could share their experiences openly. Slowly, the airline began to shed its negative reputation, earning praise for service, inclusivity, and reliability. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. She faced criticism from industry insiders who doubted that an airline could succeed, while prioritizing fairness over pure profit. She dealt with logistical issues, unexpected delays, and the pressure of integrating two different organizational cultures. Each obstacle required careful attention, problem-solving, and sometimes long nights of work. But she approached every difficulty with the mindset she had cultivated over years: Stay calm, analyze the problem, and act with integrity. One afternoon, she was invited to a press conference to discuss the acquisition. Journalists asked questions about her motivations, the challenges she faced, and her vision for the future. She spoke with clarity and poise, sharing the story of her first humiliating flight and how it had inspired her to create change. She emphasized that her goal was not revenge but transformation, showing the world that leadership, fairness, and business success could exist together. The audience responded with applause, inspired by her courage and honesty. As months passed, the airline began to flourish under her leadership. Employee morale improved, customer satisfaction soared, and financial stability returned. Her focus on inclusion, respect, and empowerment became a defining characteristic of the brand. She also used the platform to advocate for broader change in the aviation industry, speaking at conferences and sharing her experiences to inspire others to prioritize fairness and dignity. Despite the attention and success, she remained humble. She knew that the journey was ongoing and that the work of creating lasting change was never finished. She continued to meet with employees, listen to passengers, and refine policies, ensuring that the airline stayed true to its core values. Her leadership was hands-on, visible, and consistent, setting an example for others in the industry. One evening, as she walked through the cabin of one of her planes, she thought about the moment when it all began, the day she had been denied a first-class seat. The memory of humiliation was still vivid, but now it carried a different meaning. It was no longer a wound. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the power of persistence, and of the impact one person could have when they refused to accept injustice. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that she had not only reclaimed her dignity, but also transformed an entire organization and inspired countless others in the process. Her story began to spread beyond the airline industry. She was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and leadership forums. People wanted to hear about her journey, how she had turned a single act of discrimination into a movement for fairness and equality. She spoke not as a figure of revenge, but as someone committed to creating opportunities and changing the culture of an entire industry. Young entrepreneurs, employees, and passengers alike were inspired by her courage and vision. Through it all, she never lost sight of her core mission. She continued to focus on creating an environment where fairness, respect, and dignity were not optional, but mandatory. She mentored young leaders, championed diversity initiatives, and introduced programs that gave underrepresented groups access to education and career opportunities in aviation. Her leadership extended beyond the airline, influencing the industry and inspiring change in other organizations as well. Despite the demands of running a growing airline, she remained deeply personal in her approach. She remembered names, stories, and faces, whether of employees or passengers. She believed that business success was meaningless without human connection and respect. Every decision she made, from hiring to customer service policies, reflected that belief. Her story became a testament to the idea that one person's determination could challenge a system, inspire change, and set new standards for an entire industry. Looking back on the acquisition, she realized that it was more than just a business achievement. It was a moment that symbolized resilience, justice, and the possibility of transformation. She had turned a painful experience into a platform for empowerment, showing that leadership could be rooted in fairness and empathy. The airline that had once humiliated her was now a beacon of inclusivity, respect, and opportunity.